In today's episode, we explore how society continues to marginalize the disability community through harmful perceptions and practices. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that notification bell, like, share, and subscribe. Let's get started. Hey, Embracers.
Welcome back.
This is an episode I wish we didn't have to make. I'm a little bummed out about it.
Yeah, it's always nice to do the fun, uplifting ones like happy go lucky, but then we kind of find ourselves stuck in a situation where we have to kind of make the hard episode, and unfortunately, this is one of those times.
Yeah. So in the autistic community, there's always this like debate between, oh, should it be Autism Awareness Month or Autism Acceptance Month? I prefer Acceptance Month for my own personal bubble because everybody in my personal bubble is aware. But there's a lot of people that say, no, we still need awareness because there's a ton of people who still aren't clearly understanding what autism is. And that is definitely true. And I think that if you go into the comment section of almost any page on Facebook, you will find those people really quickly. And unfortunately, that is something that we discovered with our local community here. There was an incident reported on the news about a like 14-year-old kid in a local high school, one county over from us. And unfortunately, I actually think it was the same county of that Appalachia school shooting where that one autistic kid was one of the victims. And in this article, they basically were saying that he got into a physical altercation, I believe, with a teacher. And then because of that, I think he was like suspended from school for a couple days or something like that. But the big debate here is basically that the news article didn't put in a lot of information on the details, like what led to this, what exactly was the altercation. Like it was extremely vague. But the article itself was trying to give a positive perspective from the mom's perspective, like an empathetic perspective. So it was from the perspective of the mom who is basically saying like mom begs the public to like understand her son's experience and like the trauma that he's going through like as an autistic youth. And so this basically sparked a local kind of like feud, war, whatever you may call it, in the comments section between people who I would consider to be pretty ignorant on what autism is and, you know, IDEA and FAPE and all the disability rights and disability law versus parents of these kids who were in the comments trying to basically advocate for their autistic children who are often the victim of this sort of thing. So that's something that I wanted to talk about because I got involved in that conversation and boy, the comments that I got were fiery.
Yeah, it's hard though because I mean, I definitely agree. I think there is a decent amount of ignorance, but I think there's also a lot of speculation because I'm not really sure what overall circumstances were that led to it. Could it have been a meltdown that turned bad? That because there was not proper intervention? Was there anything in the IEP, like a, bringing this to staff's attention of how to deal with that? Did the staff actually know how to deal with it? Was there a special education teacher on site with the individual who, the boy who, I guess, had assaulted the teacher? So I feel like there's a lot of unknown variables, and I'm not really sure how it was dealt with. So at face value, I think there's a lot to unravel. Um, but yeah, it's kind of I don't think there's a without more information. I feel like it's hard to make a judgment call on what the overall circumstances are because we're coming from a stance of we have autistic children. Leah, you are diagnosed as autistic. Prior to our kids having a diagnosis, I didn't know what autism was. So I might have read the article and read, oh, 15, 14-year-old boy attacking a teacher. Oh, that's not right. That kid definitely should be penalized to some degree. But now that we've kind of come into our own understanding, okay, what is autism and kind of some of the behavioral challenges that go along with it, you have to kind of take that into consideration as well when trying to bring into light what actually possibly could have happened to the boy.
Yeah, and I would say for this particular situation, maybe like 10% of the comments were people who simply misunderstood and then kind of came to the light when people kind of talked to them. A good majority of these people were bullies that seem to be really intent on basically dying on the hill. Like, no matter how much information you tried to share with them, they would just turn to start mocking or belittling the parents. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about this phenomenon in society because basically there's kind of 3 different types of, like, hateful comments that were in that comment section, and one of these was basically mocking neurodivergence and parents advocating for their kids. So there was a handful of parents in there like myself, and when I say a handful, I mean there was probably, like, 180 to 200 something comments, and out of those, maybe, like, 10 were parents total. So, like, it was significantly skewed against the parents, and these are just, like, poor brave souls who wanted to try to defend this kid, and a majority of those comments were also either mocking the neurodivergence of the kid, calling parents bad parents, and blaming them for their child's behavior, and also saying things like, "Oh, autistic children should only be homeschooled then." So there's, like, a bunch of comments that basically were just really anti autism, like, they were just very ableist and, like, very vicious. Um, so one of the things that I wanted to do is kinda go through those 3 tropes of, like, the autism myths that society tends to have and, like, talk about them a little bit, those 3, like, ableist tropes. The first one that stood out to me was that, autistic kids or adults, like, autistic people don't belong in public spaces. And so what they specifically said in this comment section was autistic kids don't belong in public school system. So that's one thing that I wanted to touch base on, and I can pull up one of the comments. Let me see. I was gonna initially screen share the article, but then I was like, I don't know if I want to get into, showing everyone's name and all that stuff. So what I'll do is I'll link the article for you guys, and I'll just read out the comments anonymously for now. But one of the comments that they said, in reference to the homeschooling, let me see if I can find it. But they basically were just saying like, if you aren't able to handle school, then you should be homeschooled because you should be able to control your behavior. You should be able to control your actions. So they obviously have no idea what autism is, and they don't understand that there is a behavioral dysregulation component to it.
Well, even before we get to that, it's interesting that like the idea of invisible disabilities almost does not exist to these individuals. So like you wouldn't dare, if someone was in a wheelchair, basically be like, why are you using a ramp? Why don't you just use the stairs like everyone else? You're kind of like, you're basically taking up this area that could be used as, I don't know, a garden or whatever. Like you could use the stairs like everyone else. So no one would in their mind think like, oh, clearly someone needs a ramp because they're paralyzed. Like you would never think that. But because I guess some of these other disabilities, you can't really see them, or if you do, it's much more subtle than like an obvious physical disability. But it's like completely kind of thrown out the window, essentially. But yeah, back to what you're saying as far as like, you're getting into a point where now kids are not allowed in public spaces just because of a disability, which is
Yeah.
gross in nature. Like, I mean, it's a
This is like
public
eugenic
space.
stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a public space. I mean, our tax dollars are also going to fund the school, just like your tax dollars. Like, everyone has a right to be there. Hence, I mean, these federal laws that are in place for that purpose. So these kids can go to school like
Don't
everyone
get
else.
me started on the federal laws because
Well,
that
right.
was when I got attacked by that one parent. I was mentioning the federal laws that protect these kids' rights because people were saying that they shouldn't be allowed there. So, like, one comment is like, "Oh, I think it's scary to have a kid like this in a classroom who's out of control so quickly. Perhaps he would benefit from homeschooling!" Exclamation mark. So it was said like very aggressively. And one of the things that I had said was like, "Well, there is idea and faith and be like bit plans that are supposed to be put in place, like behavioral intervention plans, so that kids who have those issues can go to school." And a person commented back because I had mentioned, like at the beginning, like, "Hey, I'm autistic, my kids are autistic, I'm an autism advocate. These are some things that we work on. And somebody had like responded to my post and basically targeted me and basically started mocking me for being autistic and was calling me special needs. Like she was referring to me as special needs, like sarcastically. And I was like, wow, we're really here in society where somebody can quite professionally like come to you politely, just talk to you about what idea is and faith, and their response is like, okay, special needs. I was like, seriously? Are we in like kindergarten? I was shocked that it was an adult who said that.
Right, and it's unfortunate that we hope better for our children. So, as far as like, we hope that the education system informs children that there are kids with disabilities. But then you have the parents who, I mean, are just as, I mean, in this case, extremely ignorant towards, I mean, any type of disability whatsoever. So, I mean, it really kind of speaks more to that individual. I mean, just kind of being overall, I would just say clueless as to not just autism, but just as a broader sense, I would say invisible disabilities altogether. And I
Yep.
mean, even when you're trying to present them with the information saying, no, this has already been debated, obviously, hence the federal laws in place to protect these kids, they basically kind of just push back and be like, oh, that's nonsense. It's like, no, it's not nonsense. Like, people actually had to vote on this in Congress to actually pass it. So it's a federal law. You had, I mean, hundreds of members of Congress voting in favor of it to actually pass
Yeah.
it. So it's, I mean, it's
And
not
God
nonsense.
knows how many hundreds of parents who had to like lobby, get together,
Sure.
fight forever to get these rights. I mean, they're civil rights. It's like a civil rights movement that happened for the disabled community. You wouldn't say that about like the race civil rights. Like you wouldn't just be like, "Oh, those are nothing." So that's
Right.
it's horrifying. I'm so like livid about this. So
Well,
back to the homeschooling one, they mentioned that oh, perhaps you would benefit from homeschooling. The other thing that they said is where is this? I have so many of these comments, but they're basically saying that, oh yeah, he definitely does not need to go back to the same school. Counseling for anger management and community service are needed. I was like, wow, wow, people, wow.
right. So if someone falls down in class and has a seizure and it's a distraction to the class, do you hold them accountable for distracting the class?
Somebody mocked me for using that as an example
Well,
too.
but I
That
mean,
same
we had,
person. They were basically saying like, "Oh, well somebody having a seizure doesn't disrupt anyone else." And I was like,
I mean,
"What?"
right. If you
Yeah,
start
it
having
was
a
just
seizure, I mean, it would, I mean, I would think be a distraction. But also, not to mention, I mean, we've had conversations with what neuropsychologist, or was it neuropsychologist or neuro?
both psychologists, neuropsychologists.
Right, and
We've
they gave the
spoken to both.
example that a meltdown is not much different than having
Like a
a
seizure in
seizure,
the
right?
yeah.
Because your brain is like fritzing, kind of overload. So if you're basically using it with the same context that, okay, if this individual lashed out basically as he was essentially having a seizure, would you hold the person responsible who's having a seizure responsible for the actions that were taken during that time? It would be no, that's complete nonsense because clearly it's a involuntary action that's happening. So are we willing to forgive one at the expense of the other, or can we basically say like something else is at play here? And I do hope that, I mean, this individual does actually have doctors that are willing to be called in to basically kind of dispute this. I mean, this is, I mean,
Oh, this is a lawsuit totally,
oh, I
but
mean, right. But I
well,
mean,
I mean, I guess I don't actually know because they didn't publish the actual facts of what happened, so I don't really know what led up to it. So there's really no way to know, but at least people being open to the idea that this could at least potentially be autism related because he is autistic and they mentioned that, so it must be relevant. Another thing that somebody commented is they said, "Oh, most public schools have up to 30 kids in a classroom. What about the other 29? It seems that you believe his rights should supersede theirs, and that is quite simply ridiculous." It's like we're not saying that his rights should supersede. We're saying he should have equal rights. He should be seen as an equal. He shouldn't be seen as lesser and somebody who should be shoved at home and be homeschooled only because he's autistic and has these challenges.
I would actually argue I think he should be given greater, I mean, an IEP. I mean, I'm assuming he had an IEP. I have no idea what the circumstances are.
I don't
But
know. They didn't
but
say.
if he did have an IEP in place, I mean, there are definite things that they have to abide by legally. So I mean, if there's however many kids in a class, I mean, I highly doubt that it's that high. Just judging by the area that we're in, they're pretty close to us. I would say even if it's a class of 20 kids, okay, 18 of the kids don't have any necessary accommodations listed on an IEP. You have two kids who do. Those two kids, by law, need to have those IEPs abided by. So I would say, like, okay, in that circumstance, if he has an IEP in place, it should be addressed. And I mean, there should be a special education teacher that is making sure that those are followed through. I mean, it's
Yeah. And by no means am I saying that what he did was okay. I'm not defending this because apparently I think he like assaulted a teacher, but I really think that what happened leading up to that needs to be taken into consideration because there were probably multiple steps that were preventable. There's an escalation process when it comes to an autistic meltdown. And was there a BIP in place or was there not a BIP in place? If there was it being followed? Like there's so many parts of this that are just not even being discussed, and that's all that I was saying. I was like, it's not a simple basic black and white, oh, this kid did this thing, disability is not an excuse. It's like, well, if there was documentation that indicated that this was a problem and they were supposed to implement a plan and didn't, like there could be a problem here where the school was liable. I don't know, maybe they weren't, but the point that I was making is that we don't have all the facts, and to go straight to judgment is so ridiculous.
well, even so, because it seemed like it was very much an attack on the parents of the individual, and basically saying, I think some of them were saying like, "Oh, you need to make sure you teach that violence is never acceptable," and it's like, okay, like you can have
Yeah,
those
no.
conversations, and you can constantly have those conversations with your child. If that actually clicks over, and if they're able to restrain themselves during a meltdown, is a completely different story. I mean, we have two and a half autistic kids. And obviously, we make sure we tell them, no, you cannot kick your sister. Every time you kick your sister, you're going to time out. Then we have to have a conversation about we do not have violence. We do not push. We do not shove. We do not punch. We do not kick. I mean, we have a 6 and a 5-year-old, and we are still reiterating this constantly. So, I mean,
No, but you
if,
should be held completely liable
right,
because you're
right,
a horrible parent because clearly they're learning it from you. I
right.
mean, this is what the people in the comments section are saying.
But I'm at the same time, I'm kind of saying essentially, we're call it 100 days into the school year, and this is an incident that just popped up. So, okay, yes, assaulting a teacher obviously is never a good thing. This clearly was probably this kid's worst day of, I would say, probably the better part of his life. I mean, safe to say, I mean, violence to a teacher and being arrested, I would assume that's probably a pretty bad day. I think everyone has had a pretty bad day, and sometimes, I mean, there's circumstances that lead up to it, but I mean, obviously, yes, nothing. You never want anything to lead to violence. I mean, obviously, you want to try and de-escalate if at all possible, but I just think it's a bad situation, and I think rather than pointing the finger at everyone, basically saying like, "Oh, the parents are to blame. Oh, the kid is to blame," it's like, let's see what happens. But also, there's another element that's factored into it, which is the disability. I mean, if it was a non, if the child didn't have a disability, then that might be another story, and then that might be worth looking into. But since you have that other element, there's a lot of unknown variables about his cognitive ability altogether.
Yeah, I think like circling back to the whole parents thing, they seem to be just going back towards blaming the parents. And it wasn't like they were blaming this kid's specific parents. It wasn't just that. They were also going out in the comments and blaming the parents in the comments section who were advocating basically for disability rights. And I was like, wow, that because they came after me too. They were coming after any of the parents that basically said, like, hey, is he autistic? Shouldn't we know a little bit more about the circumstances? Like just questioning it, you were getting attacked. And here are some quotes of some of the things they said about the parents. So this person said, parents don't care. It's just free babysitting for the day. The parents take no responsibility. Kids back in class the next day only to repeat the same actions. And then it says, the school is bound by rules, so the kids go back to class to disrupt the other 24 kids who behave and try to follow lessons with these two kids just running amok. And that's the thing. This is like the perception of autistic kids. It's like, oh, your kid is there disrupting everybody else's peace. He's running amok. He's ruining things for everyone else. And nobody's taking into consideration, like, why? Why is this kid dysregulated? Why is he doing this? Why is he acting out? What is wrong in his world that he feels the need to act this way? Something clearly is bothering him. Something's upsetting him. Why are we not looking into that? Why do we care so much more about how the neurotypical kids are feeling than the kid who has the disability?
Yeah, I would say more often than not, you don't just jump straight to violence. Um, I mean, I'm even with, I mean, our autistic kids, if nothing has happened, generally they're not snapping, punching each other. Like, I mean, that's not usually the first step in a response to something.
That'll be fun.
Sorry.
This is
Yeah.
staying in.
But as far as like violence, I feel like that has to escalate over whatever took place. And I mean, obviously, we don't know what happened. I mean, nothing was reported in the article, but just the general assumption that this boy is no different than any other kid who is not on the spectrum or does not have a disability. I feel like these parents or whoever is reading the article is basically taking a neurotypical child in this action and applying it kind of broadly across all sectors. So they're seeing it as a kid who's currently functioning at a neurotypical level attacking a teacher and saying, oh, that's how it should be, a blanket across all spectrums.
This comment, this person said, they need to learn young that there's consequences for their actions and they can't go around abusing people and get away with it because of a, and they put it in quotes, disability. Like,
Right.
as if it's not real, like as if autism isn't real. That just infuriates me, especially when like the whole point of autism is that like there is behavioral challenges, there's like impulse challenge, executive dysfunction, all sorts of things that can cause you to unintentionally hurt people. I mean, I'm not defending that. It's obviously not a good thing, but it's also not something that autistic people are always 100% in control of. So I feel like that's just so wrong on so many levels.
Well,
But
yeah.
this one, this comment, I think absolutely takes the cake, and I want to make sure we have time to talk about it cuz we're almost done here. This one is almost a paragraph, but this one was the most infuriating to me. And let's see if you guys can pick out why I'm most upset about this one. You'll know in the first sentence. As a special education teacher of 37 years, let that sink in. I know that teachers are hogtied and restricted in their ability to work with and teach kids. However, their education starts at home, and parents need to begin teaching their autistic children from a very early age that violence and physical aggression is not acceptable and will not be tolerated! Exclamation mark. Even children with dysregulation issues know that. They know the difference between right and wrong. It's always a choice to be aggressive and act out in violence. You make it sound as if they cannot help it and should not be held accountable. The problem is permissive and enabling parents who don't make it clear that hurting others is not allowed. Autistic children need a clear and strong message about what is acceptable to be allowed access to this world! Exclamation mark. Maybe if we didn't constantly use their disability as an excuse for bad behavior, we wouldn't be here now. Wow. So much to unpack in that. And I just don't even know where to start because this is a special
Well,
education teacher who's been in the system for 37 years. If your kid is in this woman's class, run,
I would say
run.
we should probably also get a refund on her degree, because she's
If
clearly
I
in the
if I could
wrong
find a
field.
way to report her, I would because
Yeah,
this is absurd. If I
right,
found out this was my special education teacher, like wow.
right. She's clearly in the wrong field. I mean, yeah. I mean, nothing in that was nothing in that. It was just complete gobbledygook. Um, my question, I guess, back to her would be, what happens when you have an autistic child who, let's say, is a 15-year-old? Intellectually, they're 17. Behaviorally, they're 7.
They
So,
should know better.
right, you
They
want
should they
to
should know better.
just have a blanket statement that, oh, the intellect or the intellectual component where he's doing whatever math reading at a 17-year-old level, so he's clearly capable of doing the material, good to be in that classroom. But as far as behaviorally, at what, a second grade level, okay, How do you address that? Again, in her statement, she seems kind of clueless as to disabilities in general. I mean,
I'm
obviously,
horrified that
right,
she's a special education teacher.
right,
37 years, almost
right,
4 decades. These poor kids were subjected to her as a teacher. I'm going to highlight some of the things that she said and we can talk about it. So,
sure,
the first one is their education starts at home, and parents need to begin teaching their autistic children that violence and physical aggression is not acceptable and will not be tolerated. And she put that one an exclamation mark. Okay, I don't know about you, Matt, but me personally, I don't know a single parent of an autistic child who's
who
like, you know
condones?
what, kid? Yeah, violence is cool. We're cool
Right,
with this. You
right.
go ahead. You
I
know
don't,
what?
I don't know a
When you
single
gave me a black eye,
parent.
I'm okay with that.
Right, I would expand it to any parent. I don't know any parent who can actively condones violence, saying, "Oh yeah,
Well, there are
if
some
you're
parents, like parents who are like abusive or things
well, sure,
like
okay,
they clearly condone
right,
violence.
sure." I would
They're
say
lumping us in that category.
right. I would say yes. Every functional parent, as soon as your kid pushes another kid, punches, kicks, fights with their sibling, I mean, good parent will
But
be there
that's the thing,
basically.
they're saying we're not functional parents. That's the
Right,
whole point. The whole point is
right.
they're saying the only reason your kid is autistic basically is because you're a bad parent. That's basically what this is saying.
Yeah, I mean that's stupid. That's, I don't know. That's the nicest
37-year
way.
special
Yeah,
education teacher.
and that's the
Yeah.
best you can say. Okay.
Yes. And then the next line that is just blows my mind. They know the difference between right and wrong. It's always a choice to be aggressive and act out in violence. First of all, A, depends which level of autism we're talking about here. Second of all, knowing right from wrong doesn't change the fact that you can't control certain things because of behavioral dysregulation, sensory overload, like whatever it may be. Like if you're overwhelmed, it's more of a reflex. You jump first, think later. That's what executive dysfunction is. There's literally brain neurological wiring that makes it hard for you to do that. That part of your brain on a brain scan is atrophied. Like this is real science. But
Well,
no, they're choosing it.
I'm also curious as far as like the violence component, and I don't know this answer because I don't know as far as the details of it. Was the aggression actually towards the teacher, or was the teacher there when aggression happened? Was the kid
They
having a
didn't they
meltdown?
didn't say the
And
circumstance
that's and
at
that's
all.
my
There's no
next thing
context. Yeah.
because I'm just thinking back to kids on the playground throwing rocks. If you're throwing a rock at a person, yeah, not good. If you're throwing rocks and it accidentally hits someone, still not good, but less serious or less, I don't know, impactful as if you were trying to actually cause pain to someone. So if he was having a meltdown and he was hitting the ground or his desk or whatever, and she or the teacher, whoever got hurt, got hit as he's flailing his arms, I feel like that is a little different than him walking up and punching her as she's giving a lesson and he's sitting quietly at his desk.
Yeah.
Just saying
Like was it
circumstances.
intentional or
Right.
unintentional?
Right. And I mean,
Yeah.
circumstances do matter and they really do matter here too. So, I mean, yes, it's just,
Or it could even be like he intentionally hit her, but perhaps it was because he was already dysregulated and she was approaching him and he freaked out because she was encroaching on his space as he was in the middle of a meltdown. Like we
right.
we don't know. We don't know if it was reflexive. The point is we don't know. And yet almost everybody in the comments section went quick to judge. And
Right.
the judgment went square on the kid and the parents.
Right.
And I was amazed because it's been like since the 1950s where they had that whole refrigerator mom thing and they're like autism is all parents fault, and you would think that here we are on the cusp of 2025 and you would think that we would have gotten past that by now, that people would have been like, oh no, this has already been proven to be a like neurological condition, a brain condition. Like you would think that by now in this point in time they wouldn't say, oh, it's just because you don't parent hard enough. Like, are you kidding me?
You would think so, but I think these individuals also don't believe in invisible disabilities altogether. So,
Yeah. I mean, they claim it right here. She says this quote: "The problem is permissive and enabling adults who don't make it clear that hurting others is not allowed.
mm,
Autistic children need a clear and strong message about what is acceptable to be allowed access to this world." Two things for that, okay, that blow my mind. One of that is if you just talk harder to your autistic kid, They will stop being autistic. Did you know that? We found the cure. I didn't
We just
know.
haven't tried it.
No, I guess I haven't talked hard enough to our
If
kids.
only we would have found this special needs teacher of 37 years to give us advice on
I
that.
know. How come all her students aren't cured? How'd she still have work? She should have
Right.
just graduated, right?
Just talk to them
And
all.
then the second part of that, I'm being really cynical, but I'm on fire here. I'm so upset about this. And then the second one that just, ooh, this was just the cherry on top of this whole post is when she said that autistic children need that clear and strong message about what is acceptable to be allowed access to this world.
Right.
Exclamation mark.
Well,
Wow.
well, let me think. Let me think. So when she was actually, this actually might make sense from her standpoint, and let me explain. So we had talked to Michael Keene, I believe, actually probably like a year ago, and he was basically saying like when he was early diagnosed that he had spent time actually like what was it like put in a institution.
You mean Thomas McCain?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
Thomas.
but that was back in the 80s. If she's a special education teacher of 37 years, that would mean she was basically graduating when it was still
Yeah.
when you were still basically chaining these kids to radiators because they're having a meltdown.
Yeah.
So,
That's
sure,
the
it
mindset that she's
sure.
coming
It
from.
makes sense from her old school standpoint that it's perfectly acceptable to chain a autistic child who's having a dysregulatory meltdown to basically a radiator because you
In a
don't want to deal
straitjacket.
right and a straitjacket because you don't want to deal with it. So yes, she is that type of person if that is how she perceives. So you're right. She wants to throw people in like insane asylums essentially because that is basically what she's saying when she's saying access to this world. She's basically saying put them in an insane asylum.
And that
So
is why I had to talk about this. I very rarely, I don't think we've ever made a video about a Facebook post before, but like I had to because this is so scary about where we are right now and the fact that this is like reinforcing systemic barriers in education system and in community inclusion. And the fact that this is going to take a huge psychological toll on autistic children and their families, like I purposefully posted on there defending this kid knowing that I was going to have people come after me because honestly, I it's water off my back. It doesn't bother me. But I did it intentionally because I knew there was parents that are reading this that are like horrified, that are scared for their safety and their children's safety and I wanted them to know like no, you're not in the wrong. These people are in the wrong and I'm going to let you know that there's other people that agree with you. So that's why I made sure that I made a post because we all need to be that candle for other parents. Like, don't let people let you feel alone because it's that whole thing divided, they conquer, united, we stand. And so I just wanted to make sure that we talked about this. We voiced it on the podcast and we start this conversation because, idea and faith exist for a reason. They wouldn't be federal law if people were willing to do it on their own. And this is why those laws exist. And this is why there's like a moral imperative for inclusion. Like people are not going to naturally be accepting of people they find quote unquote different or people who they feel are less than. And I mean, that was definitely the vibe I was getting. I was definitely getting less than vibes here. So basically, to sum this up, because we could talk about this all day, but we are out of time. The lack of inclusion really just leads to poor outcomes for these kids and these families. And it doesn't stop there. This follows them through employment. This follows them through society. I mean, I told you, like one of the parents was mocking me and calling me special needs because I'm autistic and dared to have an opinion that differed from theirs. Therefore, I'm special needs and I don't deserve to be part of this world. So I don't have much to say in the way of positivity on that front, other than be aware that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And if you're listening as a parent, if this happens to you or your child, do not let them get you down. Like fight, be strong. Don't let them overcome you with their negativity. You know your rights, you know your kids' rights, you know their worth, you know their value. Do not let society convince you that your child is not worth what they're worth. Like, your child is beautiful, your child is wonderful as they are, and just do not let society get you down. Matt, is there anything you want to add before we
I mean,
close?
I think you summed it up really good. I mean, I always think like circumstances mean everything. So I mean, while it might be easier just to take the road out and basically kind of say like, well, a 15-year-old shouldn't be assaulting a teacher, I feel like there's so much more to the story. I mean, obviously, I feel bad for the teacher who was assaulted and her family. I mean, I know I think it was a she actually. I'm not sure. The teacher.
I don't know.
I'm not sure if they
I think
specified in the
so, but I don't
article.
know.
So I mean, obviously, I mean that family. I know they're probably dealing with, some trauma or dealing with that issue altogether. But I also think that yeah, the community definitely is not at a great place to even get to the place of embracing autism because they're still struggling with what even autism is. I mean, I think that there are. Um, yeah, I think it's definitely a struggle to try and get to embracing autism when you're just trying to figure out like what are the challenges that an autistic person would go through and that would lead them to potential outcomes such as this. So, I mean, I'm hoping that more information will come. I'm not sure what more we'll find out about it, but I hopefully it'll shed some light on what actually took place during that situation.
I will This was in our local community, so I will make sure the story doesn't get buried. Let's just say that. So this is just an example of many that shows that, how much work is still needed. And while progress is slow, every single step that we take as parents, as advocates, helps to pave the way forward for a more inclusive future. Keep in mind that, the way we got our civil rights now, the way FAPE and IDEA and all came to be was because parents got together back in the day and made it happen. So don't forget how much power you have as a parent. With that said, we'd love to hear from you. We want to know your opinions. What do you think about this story? Like, are you just equally infuriated as me? Do you think I'm overreacting, or is it like well deserving? What do they call it? Righteous anger. Leave
There
us
you
a
go.
comment on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram at Autism Wish. We want to know. And thank you so much for tuning in. We will catch you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.